Hey, everybody. Mark and I have over 20 years of experience as therapists and as addicts in long-term successful recovery. We know better than anyone what works and what doesn't to break out of porn and sex addiction, heal betrayal trauma, and reclaim your relationship.
And we've poured all of our personal and professional recovery and healing experience into a first-of-its-kind program for addicts, spouses, and couples. We call it Dare to Connect.
At least 4 times every week, we engage with you in real time, in the trenches, giving you the knowledge and the tools to take back your life and relationship.
Whatever else you've done on your journey for healing and recovery, you've never done anything like this.
Mark and I, we've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. Don't reinvent the wheel.
We all know tomorrow never comes. Look, don't wait one more day to change. Claim your free 2-week trial today at daretoconnectnow.com.
Hey, everybody. I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSE Squared podcast.
Hey, everybody, Mark and Steve on the PBSE podcast. This is a banner day. This is our 250th PBSE episode. Steve and I, wait, is that possible?
That is absolutely wild.
That's crazy amazing. And we decided, we'll talk about what we're going to do today. I don't know that we've ever done this. We, instead of having at the beginning of this episode, a question that's come in from a PBSE listener, we decided to do something a little different. You don't often, as PBSE listeners, get to hear, it's kind of like the old Paul Harvey radio broadcast way back in the day, and now the rest of the story, right? We thought we want to give PBSE listeners some insight into what happens when a coupleship, the addict is really doing hard work on the recovery side, the partner is doing amazing betrayal trauma healing work, and they come together as a coupleship. And what does that look like, right? Where does all this go? And we thought, we received these all the time, but we just got a submission by one of our couples in D2C. That was a very gracious submission where they wanted to let us know how this program has impacted them. So here's what they sent in to us. They said, when I first started, and this comes from I think this came from the Addict in Recovery. When I first started with D&C, I had 1.5 years of sobriety from porn and masturbation addiction. My wife and I, however, were still struggling with communication because of her trauma response and my lack of shame resilience. D2C sessions have helped us identify these issues, which has helped us to start the true healing and recovery process. We are communicating and now collaborating with each other like we never have before. We are still learning new things a year in and plan to continue with D2C for a while longer. Thank you, Mark and Steve, for all the effort you put into your work. Now, why did we decide to post that in the PBSE podcast on this 250th episode? Because we wanted to, I guess, Steve, first of all, you and I were feeling some deep gratitude for all of our PBSE listeners globally. All of you are what make this possible. I mean, to think that for 250 episodes, nearly 5 years, you've all been listening to a couple of crazy addicts in recovery, a couple of counselors, and that you've actually tuned in this whole time. We find that to be a miracle. I mean, that's just miraculous.
Yes.
So we wanted to say thank you. Thank you to every one of you listening. We appreciate you so much.
Absolutely.
And have so much feeling and empathy, and we're so impressed with all the work that all of you do every day. right? The hard, the success, the failure, everything in between. So thank you so much. And then as we were looking back at our string of PBSE episodes over the last several months, we looked and thought, wow, we have tackled a lot of heavy topics over the last while. And we thought maybe we need to do this 250th episode and maybe focus on all the hopeful, optimistic, positive reasons why. Why do we all do this crazy hard work of betrayal trauma, healing, and addiction recovery? What's it about? Where do we hope to get to? What's the vision of this whole thing? And so you'll notice the title of this episode, there's a couple of words in big capital letters: collaborating in the hard. Collaborating in the hard.
Mm.
And so we wanted to focus on that today. How do we come together as coupleships? And it doesn't mean that things are going to be easy, that the pain's not going to be there, the struggle, the fear, the shame, the frustrations, all of it. But how do we collaborate in the hard? And we actually spent a whole D2C session this very morning, with our couple session in Dare to Connect about this very topic, collaborating in the hard. I think, as you called it, Steve, serenity in the chaos. And so that's what we wanted to talk about today.
Yeah. And I think there are lots of ways one can look at this. One is that we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the paradigm through which one pursues recovery or looks at recovery. If I reference my own experience for a minute, Brittany and I's recovery journey, one thing that kept us stuck for a long, long time was that even though we had made a lot of progress in recovery in a lot of ways, we developed better communication skills, we had been better at talking about hard things in terms of when they would actually come up. We worked better at keeping boundaries in certain areas, but both of us were continuing to still be stuck in a mix of a couple of cycles, mini cycles of sorts. The first would be wanting to kind of caretake the other person as well as ourselves, and not want to expose one or the other to more hard because we felt like we were already doing so much hard that we didn't want to go anywhere, quote unquote, harder. Right. And so as a result, we found that there were topics, deeper issues that consciously and in some ways maybe unconsciously we were just avoiding. And that was part of the problem. I think the other component with that that would get in the way for us was that we were really not wanting to hurt the other person, right? There was a sense of emotional caretaking, for lack of a better term, that was going on, where we were wanting to, be in a place where we wanted to focus on just the positives or just the things that were really working. And it's true that it's important to celebrate victories where you can, especially when when there's difficulties, but because we weren't, and we're going to talk about this here a little bit more in a minute, we weren't, I think, fully acknowledging where we really were, at least in some areas. It made it I was going to say very difficult, but frankly, it really made it impossible to chart a course to where we really needed to go.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. There were things that we were not acknowledging or aware of fully about their significance. And so it was sort of like trying to come together and say, well, this is where we want to go, but there was no way to formulate the journey because we weren't really taking ownership for and acknowledging where we really were in some areas.
Well, and I know for me, as I look back, Steve, you and I talked about as we were putting together this podcast, we really want all the PBSE listeners to start to at least open yourself a little bit to the possibility that the greatest connection the deepest intimacy, the greatest relationship resiliency comes from going together as a collaborative team, the struggles, the hard, the crap, the garbage, right? And we know it's a hard concept to wrap your arms around. What do you mean the greatest connection, intimacy, and resiliency comes from wading through the hard and the really terrible struggles? But I think as we all kind of reflect on experiences in our lives, in fact, I've done this in audiences before. I've said, raise your hand if your greatest growth, learning, maturity, closeness has come from the really awful, terrible stuff in your life that you waded through. And virtually every audience, they'll all raise their hand. Oh yeah, it wasn't fun at the time. I didn't even know if I could get through it, but the fact that I did and came out the other side has been what has really been the most valuable for me. And I know as I was going through early to mid recovery, there was this part of me that said, I don't want to be totally transparent and totally authentic. I don't want to embrace the heart and like open up the Pandora's box and invite this stuff in. And so I found myself kind of shutting down a bit. Like, I don't want to hurt my wife anymore. So I'm going to take care of a lot of this stuff on my own. Let's not rock the boat because at least it's somewhat in stable waters. And at least how she sees me now is fairly good. So why would I mess that up?
Yeah.
Right. Why do we need to make this harder than it already is? So let's not dig down through the layers deeper. Let's not open stuff up as a couple. Let's just kind of keep things in management mode. Okay.
Yeah.
And I found myself avoiding the harder. We'd already been through a lot of hard, but the harder, the ongoing, daring to look at stuff even more deeply. I really avoided that big time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's very true. And one of the things that we talked about this morning in our Dare to Connect session was the idea of, when most of us think of connection, most of us think of, what you see portrayed in movies or what is kind of thought of in popular culture. Connection is oftentimes associated with positive experiences.
Oh
right?
yeah.
Where we're like looking out over the vista together, or we're celebrating good times, or we're, experiencing good things together. And that's true. Those are all forms of connection. But if we're really talking about experiences and the wide range of experiences that a coupleship can have, and their accompanying, I would say, depth of potential to how they can expand or deepen connection, what our experience has taught us, Mark and I, is that challenges and obstacles carry far more potential for expanding and deepening connection than do the celebratory, pleasant experiences.
Yeah. I mean, we obviously those positive ones are awesome. When they're happening, we're not saying that we should shy away from them or not enjoy them. But if we're really talking about, deep connection, deep intimacy, we talk about intimacy. Into me you see, into you I see, into us we see. Right? Let me show you who all of me is, and not you said something really powerful, Steve, as we were preparing for today, that often one or both partners will engage in avoidance cycles to establish a pattern of seeking peace at the cost of growth.
Yes.
Boy, does that define me for much of my life, right? Peace seeking at quote all costs. And what were the all costs? Mark's growth, his maturity, really knowing and choosing each other as a coupleship, right? I would just chuck all that out. Let's just keep the peace. Let's just keep things on an even keel. Yeah. We have to find ourselves naturally doing that.
Well, and when we don't talk about the hard, right? Because that's the first catalytic step and probably the most important thing that we hope those listening will take away from this podcast today. When we don't take that all important step of acknowledging hard things in a way that opens the door to collaboration, we, right out the gate, we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot in terms of potential. We know it's uncomfortable. I look back acknowledging those kinds of challenges. I mean, it's terrifying. I've told the story more than once here, where Brittany and I kind of sat down after one of our worst fights ever, and we sort of got honest with each other about the fact that, yeah, I think it was like October at the time. Both of us just kind of looked at each other, and more or less there was an admission that I think this marriage may not make it to the new year.
Mm.
Like, I think we may be done. And it turns out, as we look back on that, both of us had been carrying that fear around for a while. But what had happened, we were guilty exactly of what we're talking about here. Because that was so scary and so terrifying to acknowledge, even just internally, neither one of us was voicing that to the other. And so, in to a degree, what out of a place of not wanting to hurt the other person, or that would maybe make it true, or whatever it was, what were we doing? We weren't really acknowledging the severity of where we were. And it was preventing us from being able to take ownership and in the process begin to actually chart a path ahead of, okay, what do we really need to do here?
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest, Steve, when the two of you kind of came together after things were just totally rock bottom and finally got honest and transparent with each other, while it was hard to say those words, we might not make it till Christmas. I would suggest that the fact that you both decided to dare to do that, that in some ways started your collaboration.
I would totally agree with that.
Yeah.
100%. In
Yeah.
some ways, it was where in some ways, it was terrifying, but it actually kind of catapulted us forward into a greater depth in the healing process, because it was what we were talking about before. We were to a deeper level acknowledging where we really were so that we could actually chart a course towards where we wanted to go. But it only happened through the acknowledgement of, this is how bad things really are. This is how rough it is. This is where each of us really is. So what is it going to take to get to that better place that we keep saying we're wanting?
I remember for me, it was, and I've said this often on PBSE, it was the night that, and I remember this like it was yesterday. It has such powerful memory inside of me when my wife finally got, she's such a, and like Brittany, both of our partners are such natural caretakers. They're natural nurturers. They're very good at just doing whatever you got to do to hold things together and get it done. They're both really good at that. And finally, one night, my wife looked at me and she got totally authentic and transparent, probably for the first time. And she finally said to me, I am completely exhausted, spent, done. I can't carry this anymore. We had 5 sons, and she said, I'm raising 5 sons, and I don't want to hurt you or destroy you, but you've been a sixth boy that I've been raising, and I love you, and I want this to work, but I just can't do this anymore. I won't do this anymore. Now that was real. Now, was that in some ways devastating for me to hear? I'm not going to candy coat it. I was devastated, absolutely crushed beyond description. But out of that conversation, we began to take the baby steps of collaboration, true collaboration, for the first time in our marriage. And we were probably 18 years in by that point.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
Yeah, these difficult conversations that we have to have, they're tremendously difficult, they're tremendously scary, because they do make things, quote unquote, more real. They do bring things into focus, and that is really hard for a coupleship, especially when that coupleship has been through a great deal. Nevertheless, if you're really wanting to make change, if you're really wanting to move forward, coupleships, when we face hard things, even though they do obviously with them carry the potential for failure, meaning the relationship could fail or other consequences could result, they are also the crucible in which relationships are formed. And that is borne out, as we talked about in Dare to Connect this morning, in any great epic, any great tale. When you look at the concept of in literature of like the hero's journey, right? Look at Homer's Odyssey, you look at the Lord of the Rings trilogy, you look at other great epic tales that have been narrated throughout time. What happens? There we have the hero or the characters at play who face what? Tremendous obstacles in many cases, many of them, overwhelming odds. And as they grow in the struggle, as they collaborate with compatriots, as they utilize resources at their disposal, there comes that redemption arc of overcoming, where at the end of the overcoming of that obstacle, the characters are stronger
Well, I
as a
remember
result.
you said Lord of the Rings. I remember the last main Lord of the Rings. What was the Return of the King? Um, Legolas the elf and Gimli the dwarf, who have been their two cultures have been enemies, bitter enemies for generations, and they've been through what you're saying, Steve. This whole struggle, crazy things they've been through together through the whole struggle, and now they're at the last great battle where it looks like they're about to die. And Gimli looks up at Legolas and said, "I never imagined that I would be facing the end, standing next to an elf." And Legolas looks down and said, "How about standing side by side with a friend?"
Mm,
And
yeah.
Gimli's whole face changed. He says, I could do that. And you're just like, whoa, right? And that's how I feel things are with my wife now. I've often said the crazy hard we've been through, which has been atrocious in so many ways. We are so welded together now that you could drop an atomic bomb on us and it's not going to separate us. It's not, right? We'd be laying as a couple, still welded together in the aftermath and carnage of the bomb. It's like they're still welded. But that's so much of what we're talking about here, right?
Mm,
And another thing that Steve, you and I have talked about, when you developing relationship, let's put it in quotes, relationship skills in the good times, the romantic dinners, the awesome vacations, that's good. But when you develop relationship skills in the hard, you develop real relationship skills, right?
yes.
I've seen that with me. I've seen that, Steve, with you and Brittany, and you guys have some mad skills
That's kind.
that you've developed through some really hard stuff.
Well, and I think that in Mark and Ladon's story is the same, right? These skills did not come. One of the things, we were talking about pop culture a minute ago, and I think that part of why we struggle with this concept so much is because that, again, what is upheld in our culture, right? It's always the celebrations, right?
Yep.
There's always the upholding is always the end of the journey, right? We don't take enough time to look at, well, how did this relationship become so galvanized? Right. And you see this not just in literature, like we've talked about. Um, Mark and I have both in our careers worked with veterans extensively. And when you talk to any veteran, uh, like a combat veteran from deployment, they will hands down tell you the relationships that they established and formed with other guys in their brigade or platoon or group or whatever.
Other women. I mean,
Yes,
yeah, lots of
they,
lots, lots of female vets too.
yeah, those relationships are relationships that transcend and deepen beyond almost any others that they cultivate in life.
Mhm.
Why? Because it happens what? It happens in the struggle. It happens from that collaboration of watching each other's back in a challenging situation, facing adversity, taking things on together, learning to trust the person next to you that they're going to guard your flank while you're doing your thing, right? These are necessary skill sets if coupleships are to expand
Well,
and to
what's the
grow.
thing that we've heard veterans tell the stories to us? That doesn't mean that those relationships were ideal,
No.
always courageous, or always collaborative, or always whatever. There was a lot of crap that happened, right? Remember one time we got tough, and I ran down the road and left my buddy stranded, right? But then I came back, and I tried again, right? It's sloppiness to it. steps back, 2 steps back, 1 step forward. It's not this perfect curve. It's the hard is all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked today, Steve, about you and Brittany finding ways to find serenity in the chaos. You're right in it. And yet there's this part of you that feels we're going to be okay. I don't know how, or I may not know exactly why, but I know we will. You've got my back, I've got yours. We're doing this.
Yeah.
There's a power in that. And lots of our PBSE listeners are in the thick of that right now. And we talked to you and Steve, you and I, about how concerned we become for them, that they become hopeless or helpless, or not seeing the bigger vision of it, because you're so hunkered down in the hard. And it's so important for us for at least some part of us to step back, to just sort of watch and observe and look a little. What is this really about? Where are we really headed? So important.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we emphasize today in that D2C session is this idea that where this all begins, as you guys can see, is in the what? It's in the internal mindfulness and vulnerability, which then extends into the sharing with your partner.
Mm-hmm.
One of the challenges that we oftentimes run across with couples, and we know that some of you listening to this can relate, is where, because of a lack of mindfulness or because of a presence of that caretaking we talked about earlier, there's not a sharing of the struggle. Right?
Well,
we had a quite. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, from my standpoint, it wasn't caretaking on my side. It was me shutting down and going stoic and silent and isolating to do what? To go off and handle it by myself. That's what I was taught to do, right? You pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You don't share your dirty laundry. You don't expose the skeletons in your closet. When things get tough, you go it alone. And so I would so quickly and easily do that. And part of it was because I was trying to do damage control, not hurt the relationship further, control my wife's feelings and thoughts about me. By Mark going it alone, I was gonna control, damn it, how this relationship's gonna turn out. Right. And that was my old addiction mindset, because what is addiction? Addiction is ultimate control. My life's out of control. I'm stressed. I'm afraid. Things aren't working out. Oh, I know what to do. I'm going to go control all this by going to my addiction outlets. I got this. And we're talking about just the opposite.
Yeah. We live in a world, everyone, that it's not oftentimes safe to expose your weaknesses. And we learn that through different means, as Mark just really well put. Sometimes that's through childhood experience, abuse, neglect. Sometimes it's other traumatic experiences. But we live in a world, as we say oftentimes on this podcast, that this world is filled with people who are wired for connection, but in a world that is consistently pushing against the very thing that it so desperately needs.
Yeah.
A culture is seemingly wired all the time that looks down on vulnerability, that looks at weaknesses or fallibilities as something to be shunned or shielded or not acknowledged. And it is true that in many environments that would not be appropriate or safe. Right. But when it comes to the relationships that we have with those people on the planet through which we are trying to seek the greatest, most deepest intimacy with, like a partner, the depth to which the relationship begins with the depth to which we are willing to expose those fallacies. When we acknowledge challenges as well as their accompanying fears, their hesitations, their insecurities and vulnerabilities, that is what sets the stage for truly intimate dialogue. There are too many couples out there where one partner sets the tone of things are good, I've got this. And that in turn does what? Sets the stage or puts pressure on the partner to also be able to say, well, geez, they've got their shit together. So I too am good.
Yeah, I'm not going to be the one that messes this up. Right? Yeah.
And so what do we have? We have oftentimes many coupleships where on the outside, both people are actually struggling and they're not acknowledging it. And not only does that leave the couple vulnerable to all of the things that we talk about on this podcast all the time, as it pertains to this discussion today, guys, it is an epically missed opportunity for that coupleship to deepen.
Yeah.
That thing that so many of us, that conflict that so many of us eschew or want to avoid or want to run from, if handled properly, is the coupleship's salvation.
Yeah.
It's the very thing that provides the opportunity to create the collaboration, the trust, the vulnerability that is needed if the coupleship is to continue into other avenues of recovery.
Yeah. I love that. Right. And I would say to the degree that we are willing, and again, this is progressive. You don't magically leapfrog into this place. But I remember the first time that I dared to look my wife in the eyes and say, I'm afraid. I'm scared. I feel like a scared little boy. I feel like I'm 7 years old again. It was so hard to say to her, right? Because part of me said it diminished me as a man. It showed me as weak and incompetent and not capable. What's she going to think of me? But I dared to say it. And it's part of what opened the door for us to start to engage in collaboration. And guess what? If you're not collaborating in the hard, you are severely limiting your connection. Collaboration equals connection. And I wrote a final note in our notes, Steve. I don't know if you saw it. I added it when we were kind of getting ready to do this. As I looked at all the hard that my wife and I have waded through together and still do so, quite often, I realized that we actually put ourselves in a place through that transparency, authenticity, realness, where we actually got to choose. We got to each decide if we were going to choose all of each other. The good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. And that scared the living daylights out of me. I didn't want to let my wife see all of me because what if she didn't choose that version of Mark? So I hid myself because I wasn't willing to give her that choice. But boy, when we got to the place where we were willing to do that, it was unbelievably liberating. Because bless her heart, she said, okay, now I'm seeing all of you. We're engaging in intimacy. I'm seeing all of you. And guess what, Mark? Knowing all that, I'm deciding to choose you. I cannot tell you what that did to my sense of worth, my sense of purpose, my sense as a man. Holy crap, everything I was afraid to ever show her. She's now seen it and she still chooses me? Like what? Right? Wow. And we keep choosing each other on a daily basis, trying to.
Yes.
Now, sometimes does it happen when it gets that raw, real, transparent, and everything comes out into the open? Are there some instances where the coupleship decides that they're knowing all that they're not going to choose each other, or we now realize we're not compatible? Sometimes I would say it's definitely the exception to the rule in our experience.
Yeah. But and that is a scary thing to face, right? But that's where every person has to make that determination about how far are they willing to go, right? In this quest for authenticity, how you live your life, who you live your life with, right? Life is so short. As we say in Dare to Connect, oftentimes, life is too short, therapy's too expensive, and recovery's too hard to do it, in the wrong setting or half-assed.
Right.
um,
Right. Yeah.
if you are you willing to take that journey? And if you are, we would submit in our experience that facing those scary things, as hard as it is worth the risk, because the potential rewards on the other side, not just for your own authenticity, but for the potential of where it can take you in your connections.
High risk,
Is
high
huge.
reward. Boy, that's true of what we're talking
Yeah,
about today, isn't it?
absolutely.
Yeah. I
So
guess
hopefully this is a message for everybody, right? Wherever you are in this process, what's a way you could level that up today? Right? Level up that transparency, level up that dialogue. And it doesn't always mean it's around something epic or huge. right? Connection is created through the sharing of the struggle and allowing a partner to be able to share in that.
Yeah.
And so maybe for some of you, maybe that means having really big conversations you haven't had. Maybe for others of you, it's about, I'm going to be more transparent about some of the challenges I'm facing at work or this or that. Because what does that do? It opens the door for my partner to collaborate with me, empathize with me, connect with me, support me, and me to do that with them.
I love it.
So,
Yeah, I think that's our message today. We hope this has been hopeful, optimistic. We hope it helps to give all of you listening a vision that you can start to keep in your individual minds and in your coupleship mind. Where are we headed? Where's all this hard effort that we're doing in recovery and healing? Where's it taking us? Or do we just feel completely hunkered down and just kind of buried every day, slugging forward? Is there more to it than that?
yeah, absolutely. Everybody, thank you for, as always, we would love to entertain your submissions and address questions that you have on the podcast. If you go to pbsepodcast.com, you'll see that takes you to our main Dare to Connect website. Just click at the banner at the top of there, which will take you to the PBSE page within that. And there's a contact form at the bottom where you can submit those questions to us. But as always, if you are liking the podcast, you will be loving Dare to Connect. All you got to do is just get your hiney in here. daretoconnectnow.com. That's where you can grab a free 2-week trial for that program. That includes a subscription, by the way, for both you and your spouse. We'd love to have you come join us, check it out, see what the excitement's about, and see how Dare to Connect can take you wherever you are in this process to the next step, to the next level.
Yeah, love it. Again, thanks to all of you across the planet. We love and appreciate you. You're why we do this. And we will definitely be here for the next episode.
Absolutely. Here's to 251.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Take care, Bryce.
All right.
Bye-bye. Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.